Hi, so my name is Sarah Fox, and I'm going to be presenting to you today on footers. The definition of a footer. The term footer or page footer was originally used in print design to describe type that is separate from the main body of text and appears at the bottom of a printed page, not to be confused with a footnote, because they do both stay at the bottom of the page. The main difference between a footer and a footnote is that the footer is relatively uniform between pages. So in reference to web design, I think that's a really important thing to point out, that the footer stays the same on every single page, and it's kind of what unifies the entire website as a whole. There are 4 types of footer categories that I came up with, kind of loosely named. The first one, the practically non-existent footer, so typically it's just like a copyright symbol, or maybe some social media links. Some examples of this one in this case actually is pretty non-existent. This is just a simple web page, about just an idea for a demo. It doesn't really need to be an entire page, or website, I mean. So it just has these simple little social media links in the bottom, and that's about it. This one, just a copyright and some social media links. Whoops. You get the point. This one, since this whole page exists within the container of this window, it makes sense to also just kind of have a simple footer. Although in this case, they pretty much combine the navigation bar with the footer. So usually, well, not usually, but sometimes the footer is a secondary navigation. In this case, it's primary, which is kind of interesting. Also, those little animals are cute. This one, again, another example, simple, kind of boring, phone number, contact information. And now we're getting into footers a little bit more interesting. So that one I called the simple full width footer. So it's typically responsive. Full width just means it takes up the full width of the page. As you can see as I resize the browser, it gets bigger and smaller. There we go. Yeah, so just kind of simple. This one, still not very much information, but it has a lot of negative space, which I kind of like. Gives you room to breathe. This one I like that it's categorized, like explore, contact, follow. Kind of like we talked about in class last week about having, the human brain only being able to remember like 7 plus or minus 2 things at a time. So how it really helps to categorize and organize things. You don't have like 50 links. This way your brain can remember them easier. This one does the same thing, different categories. This one I really like. Oh, I guess now I'm getting into fat footer. So the fat footer has many links, may have images or content, sometimes a full site navigation, which as you can see on this one, actually no, not that one. I guess this one more so fits the full site navigation. So again, it's categorized. This one's really cute because I think it pretty accurately displays the personality of this web page, because it has a lot of personality. So they chose to go with the blue instead of traditionally black and white like most of the other ones I've just shown are. And this one is another one made by the same web design firm. And this one's interesting because this section, and this bottom section are all kind of the footer. And they each have their own little unique design, which again ties into the personality of the web page. It kind of ties everything together to have this on the bottom of every single page. It's pretty cute. The awards web page actually has some images in their footer, which I thought was interesting. And I like that this little heart pulses. And then, let's see. Oh yeah, okay, so footer that isn't even on the bottom or otherwise unusual. So on this web page, this is the footer, and basically all it is a link to the next project that then transitions into the next page, which I think is a really interesting way to transition between pages. Definitely ties the pages together in a way where you don't need to have the exact same image or footer or information, on every single page to tie them together. They still found a way to tie everything together. This web page, so like I said here, that it's typically used when there's an endless scrolling feed. So this is an example of an endless scrolling feed. As you can see, after a certain point of scrolling, the right column becomes fixed and the other two columns keep moving. So since this one scrolls forever and ever and ever, it would make sense to have a footer on the bottom because you would never see it. So in this instance, I guess I kind of consider this right column to be the footer. It has footer-like elements. Fortunately, it is in English, even though I clicked Google Translate. Or I mean, it's in French, not English. So I still don't know what it says, but it seems like footer information. So, close out of this. And then this one doesn't even have a footer, if you just kind of look at it. It's simple, it's more about the photography. The only way to get to the footer is by clicking right here, like I just did on the menu button. And then you see the logo, their address, contact, typical footer information, but it's only accessible over here, which I kind of like because it allows to focus on just the photography and to have it be really simple and not cluttering anything up. This one, notice as you scroll, it's another scrolling feed, but as you get to the bottom, whoops, I hovered over that so you didn't get to see it. As you get to the bottom, a footer does show up, but only for a second, and then it disappears as more and more images load over. So, I mean, how functional is that really if you only have a second to ever click on it? I actually find it kind of more annoying than helpful, but it's certainly interesting. This web page, sure, we'll translate. This one's interesting because it just kind of follows the traditional definition of a footer. All it really is page numbers on the bottom of the page. So, I mean, what kind of more do you need? This one scrolls horizontally, which I will talk about in a little bit. So, in summary, it seems there's two really main different types of footer, small versus large. There's two different styles of footer, conventional versus unconventional. So, like the typical grid or column layout, full-width footer would be more on the conventional side, whereas a footer that is unusually placed or has some other unconventional functionality to it would be considered unconventional. So the pros of a small footer: it's concise, it's straight to the point, takes up less real estate space, clean, minimalistic aesthetic, makes sense for simple concepts such as blossom type, makes sense. Cons: it leaves a little room to add on to later. So if you're not a designer and someone else designed it, you need to bring them back on if you want to add onto it later. Also, it can be boring and expected or kind of conventional. It was really easy finding examples of small footers. It was much harder finding examples of a large footer. The pros of a large footer are that it's an excellent way to emphasize important information that needs to be on every page. Allows room for character and design. So, for example, like this one and this one, it just allows another space to kind of reflect the personality and the character of the web page. Kind of reiterate that brand identity to the person, well, to the user, I mean. So, and it helps unify the website's identity. Also, it allows for secondary navigation or sitemaps to help the user find their way and never get lost. Cons: it takes up quite a bit of space, which could be valuable real estate for other important information. Also, it can feel redundant if not all of the content is relevant. So, for example, although I like this footer, it does feel somewhat redundant because they do have a fixed navigation. Notice as I scroll, it stays fixed. And that has all the links that you would kind of ever need, and it has a search button. So, I mean, do they really need to put these links here again at the bottom? Feels a little redundant in my opinion. So then the conventional footer, which again is just a traditional, full-width footer that's usually at the bottom of the page. Pros: the user always knows where to look to find it because it's always at the bottom. Following the traditional rules of a website, so such as having a header, having a nav bar, menu button, footers, makes a site easier to use and navigate for those who aren't that great with technology or that familiar with the internet. Cons, everyone else is doing it, so it may seem boring or expected. But then again, it's kind of just a convention of websites. It's kind of, something that has evolved over time and is supposed to be there. So, it doesn't have to be boring if you don't make it boring. Unconventional footer. So pros, it's much more interesting than simply placing a copyright at the bottom of the page for stand-in, because those get pretty old after a while. It's unexpected, it's entertaining, it opens up a range of possibilities for the layout of the rest of the page. So for example, like the last one that I showed, this one scrolls horizontally. It doesn't feel tied down in any way to, having any certain type of layout. It can just kind of exist however it wants to exist. Just simple page numbers so that you don't get lost. And then the cons of an unconventional footer. So it's pretty, it's trendy for now, but for how long? It can be hard to find, but that's really only a problem if you choose to place important information in it. So if you are going to have a footer that isn't on the bottom of the page, I suggest not putting super important information in it, or if you do put super important information in it, make sure it's either easy to access or it exists somewhere else on the web page so that people can find it. And that's the end. So thank you for watching.